Now, the video about the Avro CF100 Canuck that I'm doing here ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated. So, what I've done is made it a two-part episode. Part 1 will be Friday. It's now. And the next one will be on Monday. So they're not too far apart. I had too much information, too much good information, too much good videos, and still try and have my kit review of what kits are available on top of that. So I thought it'd be either have an hour long, which you guys don't like, or have two 30-minute episode segments. So I'm broke it up in 30-minute segments. So I hope you enjoy these two videos, and let's see what we get on with it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hacker's Misadventures in Scale Modeling. Now that March break is over, I had the kids home all week. I now can continue on with my videotaping. And no, I haven't got new headphones yet, but we're getting there. Anyways, continuing with the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force, we're going to be looking at a totally Canadian-made jet fighter, from drawing board to finish. This is the Avro Canada CF100 Canuck. Now, one of us Canadian modelers' favorites, next to the CF105 Aero, which I will be getting to, and I'll be doing some other aircraft after the CF-18. I'm going to be doing some maritime patrol aircraft. So, without further ado, let's see what we got going here.
As the Cold War loomed on the horizon shortly after World War II, Canada worried about the possibility of Soviet bombers flying over the Arctic Ocean, ready to deliver nuclear payloads on North American targets. Consequently, Canadian Air Force officials made a bold decision and built their own indigenously developed fighter interceptor from scratch. Flying for the first time on January 19, 1950, Avro Canada's CF-100 Canuck was a long-range, all-weather interceptor with an advanced radar system fitted on the nose. During its run, Canada's good old Canuck was one of the world's best all-weather fighters and one of NATO's most valued aircraft. And for a while, it was the only fighter of its type used by the organization's forces in Europe, where it excelled at protecting the western skies from continuous Soviet attacks in extremely harsh, zero-visibility conditions. A Canadian aircraft. As the Cold War began and warfare capabilities evolved, the Canadian government decided to increase its defense budget. Royal Canadian Air Force officials believed that a self-sufficient military aviation industry of local origin would be of great value, and identified the need for a new jet-powered interceptor aircraft, capable of patrolling the country's sizable northern territory that could operate in extreme weather conditions. According to Air Marshal Wilfred Curtis, no existing or planned aircraft could satisfy such specifications, so the Air Force decided to issue a request for proposal in 1946. While the local aviation industry typically entertained the idea of developing 100% indigenous aircraft, none had been pushed into actual production to that point. However, this would change with Avro Canada's proposal. On October 13, 1946, the Canadian government granted the contract to the local manufacturer, allowing the company to begin work on the XC-100. The team was led by Chief Engineer Edgar Atkin, but the group was also advised by former de Havilland aircraft designer John Frost, now the Chief Design Engineer for the company's military projects. While the first prototype successfully flew on January 19, 1950, The second was lost in an accident a year later. In response to the failure, Avro Canada and Edgar Atkin dismissed several members of the design team and focused on rectifying a significant structural design error. The team then developed a simple modification that was easy to install in the other pre-production aircraft, but now with a local Orenda 2 engine that pilots liked very much. With the program now moving steadily, the Canadian Air Force reached an additional agreement with Avro Canada to produce 10 pre-production fighters and 30 Avro Orenda engines. The first production version, designated Mark III, flew successfully for the first time in October of 1952. The models would receive minor adjustments during the following years, and the now renamed CF-100 aircraft performed hundreds of cold weather and armament tests with the United States Air Force in the Eglin Air Force Base. Unparalleled. The Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck was the only Canadian-designed fighter interceptor to enter mass production, and it was known by its numerous crews as the Clunk, due to the noise it made through the front landing gear as it retracted into itself after takeoff. The company's engineers devised a standard tubular fuselage, long enough to house the necessary fuel stores, avionics, and other internal structures, and was armed with 8.5mm caliber machine guns. Also, a two-person crew sat inside the cockpit in tandem. This jet interceptor weighed roughly 17 tons, with a top speed of 650 miles per hour and a range of up to 1,000 miles, and also featured a short takeoff run and high climb rate. The Canuck interceptor was explicitly built for all-weather or night conditions and high-altitude capabilities, thanks to an advanced radar set and fire control system behind the aircraft's nose. On December 18, 1952, Avro Chief Development Test Pilot Janusz Żurakovski flew a CF-100 fourth version prototype up to Mach 1.1 in a dive from 45,000 feet. This flight turned Canada's only locally made aircraft into the first straight-wing jet aircraft in the world to achieve supersonic flight without the aid of rocket power. Operational history. When the aircraft entered service, it was one of the few interceptors in the world with all-weather capability. As such, the Canadian Canuck was one of NATO's most valued aircraft. With the formation of the NATO Western Alliance and the insurgence of the Cold War, many believed that Europe would be the next potential battleground. Others were convinced that the Korean War was a diversion to confuse the West and lead forces to Asia. As such, Canada committed to providing several ground forces and squadrons in an effort to deter potential attacks on the West. These Canadian aircraft squadrons were set to follow the North Atlantic ferry route, developed during World War II by the Royal Air Force Ferry Command. The aircraft would take off from Newfoundland and fly to Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, and England. The first aircraft to carry out these flights were the F-86 Sabres in Operation Leapfrog, and the type flew the path on 4 separate occasions between May of 1952 and September of 1953. However, after the program's top officials recognized it as an all-weather night fighter interceptor, the squadron Sabres were replaced by Canucks. This decision provided NATO with a powerful interception capability, especially as there were no other night fighters in all of Europe. Under the codename Operation Nimble Bat, the Canucks followed the same route, defending North American airspace against potential intruders between October of 1956 and August of 1957. Around the same time, and up to 1962, 4 CF-100 Canuck squadrons were sent to a base in Europe, with the 1st Air Division in a decision influenced by NATO. The CF-100 Canuck typically retained a natural metal finish when flying in North America. However, the Clunks flying in overseas missions were given a British-style disruptive camouflage paint job with dark sea gray and green on top and light sea gray on the bottom. For a time, the CF-100 was the only fighter capable of flying with zero visibility and in poor weather conditions in all of NATO's arsenal. And at its operational strength peak in the mid to late 1950s, the CF-100 served with 9 Royal Canadian Air Force squadrons. Throughout its 3-decade-long service, both its role and weaponry changed throughout the years, from the initial 8.5mm caliber machine guns to rockets, guided missiles, and even earlier versions of the AIM-7 Sparrow air-to-air missile. Many of the world's operational CF-100s operated under the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD, a joint organization between the United States and Canada established during the Cold War that provided aerospace warning, air sovereignty, and protection for Northern America. Sharing the responsibility with Convair F-102s and F-106s owned by the United States Air Force, the CF-100 Canuck protected Canada and the United States from Soviet intruders at the height of the Cold War. Canada's pride. In 1955, Janusz Żurkowski, the same Avro Canada test pilot that helped the aircraft fly past the speed of sound, performed another dramatic demonstration flight. During the Farnborough Air Show in England, the chief development test pilot took his Canuck to the skies to perform a falling leaf. In this acrobatic maneuver, the aircraft is allowed to stall and be swayed to the right and the left by the pilot, with the nose steadily pointing in the same direction all throughout the exercise. The feat stunned many aviation and industry experts and spectators who could not believe that such a large fighter could perform the maneuvers so seamlessly. Żurkowski's incredible performance led Belgium to purchase over 50 CF-100s, and even the United States Air Force came close to acquiring several such fighters. As America joined the Korean War in the early 1950s, the U.S. Air Force urgently needed a jet-powered, all-weather interdiction and surveillance aircraft. In fact, the branch was in such a hurry that the American government was willing to break tradition and considered buying and adapting two foreign designs, Avro Canada's CF-100 Interceptor and the English Electric Canberra medium bomber.
Both good planes.
Still, the Canuck's range and payload capabilities were insufficient for the service, and the English rival was selected and later turned into the Martin B-57 Canberra program. Exceeding expectations. Although Avro Canada engineers only designed the Canuck to only last 2,000 hours, the developers soon found out that the Interceptor's airframe could serve for over 20,000 hours before the need for retirement. In total, 692 CF-100s of several different variations were produced. The sixth and final proposed CF-100 variant would bridge the stock between the Canuck and its successor, the AF-105 Aero supersonic interceptor, in development during the late 1950s. However, in 1959, following a controversial decision by the Canadian government, work on the CF-105 was terminated.
Like I said,
this decision severely damaged the Canadian aero industry in the decades that followed. Despite the program's cancellation, the aircraft remained on the front lines until 1963, when it was replaced in its frontline role by the much faster McDonnell CF-101B Voodoo.
Another one we're doing.
Still, the Canuck continued to serve with the 414th Squadron of the Canadian Forces in reconnaissance, training, and electronic warfare roles. All the remaining Royal Canadian Air Force Canucks were withdrawn from service in 1981 after being succeeded by the CC-117 Dassault Falcon. After that, all Canadian Air Force aircraft have been acquired via export, and the CF-100 Canuck remains the only mass-produced aircraft in the nation.
Sad. Really sad, though.
Thank you for watching Dark Skies. Don't forget to leave a comment below and hit the like button if you liked our video. And for more historical and military content, subscribe to this and all the channels in our Dark Documentaries family. Stay tuned.
Okay, so now we go on to another video about the Canuck. Now, the one thing he did not mention was the fact that I think it's the Mark 5 and the Mark 6 had extended wingtips. I got a picture of that I'm going to insert in. But this next video is about the advanced variants of the CF-100. So let's have a look and see what I know what the variants are. So let's have a look and see what they say about those variants.
The Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck was a great achievement for the Canadian aerospace industry. and established Canada as a major aerospace power. During its production, several advanced variants were proposed to further enhance its capabilities. This took the form of new weapon systems and a few radical airframe modifications. Some were tested and others never made it off the drawing board. For a more complete discussion about the history and deployment of the CF-100, check out my video called The Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck. Here we will discuss some of the advanced variants not covered in that video. While this is not a complete list, it does cover the major proposals. First, we'll look at the weapon systems proposed for the Canuck that would have greatly enhanced its effectiveness as an interceptor. The Velvet Glove was a Canadian-designed and produced semi-active radar-guided missile. A Mark III Canuck was modified to carry 4 of them in pylons just outside and underneath the engine shroud. Later, a Mark V would be modified to carry the Sparrow II missile, which was under joint American-Canadian development. Many test firings of both missiles were conducted in the late 1950s. Although neither missile made it into active service, the tests were valuable for collecting data and experience that would be used on later projects. A more complete overview of these missile programs can be found in my video called The Velvet Glove Missile, a Beginner's Guide to Post-War Aerial Combat Weaponry. Other missile systems available at the time were proposed to outfit the Canuck. These included the Sidewinder, a rear aspect heat-seeking missile, and the smaller Falcon, which came in 2 versions. One was heat-seeking and the other was a semi-active radar-guided model. The Sidewinder would be mounted on pylons beneath the wing roots and associated systems would be installed in the cockpit. The Falcons were mounted on similar pylons. The Canuck would be able to deploy both variants of the Falcon, and so the ventral weapons bay was occupied with its associated equipment. Both the Sidewinder and Falcon were short-range missiles, and so still necessitated a certain degree of dogfighting, to which the Canuck was generally ill-suited for. The American company, the Bendix Corporation, designed a long-range radar-guided missile called the Eagle in 1957.
Would have been interesting to see Sidewinders on the wingtips.
This missile would have enabled interceptions at ranges of 200 to 300 kilometers, much greater than with other systems. The substantial size and weight of the missiles required designers to mount them on the wingtips. Associated systems were installed in the ventral weapons bay. The missile was eventually cancelled in 1960 without any hardware having been tested outside of wind tunnels. The Canuck was also able to be equipped with a nuclear option. The Genie was an unguided rocket with a 1.5 kiloton warhead and could reach out to a range of 10 kilometers. The rockets were mounted on the wingtips similar to the Eagle. Although never tested on the CF-100, the Genie would go on to arm the CF-101 Voodoo interceptors guarding the northern approaches into Canadian airspace. In addition to weapon systems, there were also some attempts to expand the capabilities of the aircraft through radical airframe redesign. In 1967, a Mark V Canuck was temporarily modified with a third turbofan engine mounted underneath the center of the airframe. This was done to test a new engine design called the JT-15D by the United Aircraft of Canada, who would later become Pratt & Whitney Canada. This variant was never intended to become an operational model and was done purely for research purposes. A drastic redesign of the basic layout came in the form of the proposed CF-100 Mark X variant. The Mark X, or Mark X, would attain higher speeds and altitudes by doubling the number of engines. 4 British-built Orpheus engines would replace the 2 Orenda engines in the fuselage and add 2 more on the wingtips. These engines were 2.8 meters long, weighed 385 kilograms, but each produced 224 newtons of thrust. This was somewhat impressive performance for its time. Originally, the wings were to be extended by 2.74 meters and strengthened to accommodate the new engines. The tail wing was also redesigned and swept back for increased performance at higher speeds. The Mark X was to be equipped with 4 Sparrow missiles. No prototypes were produced and the proposal was abandoned. NATO countries recognized the vulnerabilities of airfields in the case of an all-out war. The ability to operate from unprepared airfields, roads, and fields was sought as an operational requirement for all future aircraft. While rocket-assisted takeoffs were experimented with on roads and short airfields, it didn't fully address the problem. A vertical takeoff and landing version was proposed. The design was way ahead of its time and was practically a different aircraft. The main fuselage weight was reduced by 3,900 kilograms by eliminating the radar and the fire control system, the center fuel systems, and the rear cockpit seat. In addition to this, the engines were replaced by two Bristol Orpheus BE-53-2 engines. Thrust from the engines was vectored downwards during V-stall flight from vents in the front and rear of the engine nacelles. Puffer vents on the wingtips, nose, and tail would be connected through an autopilot to provide control at low speed and during vertical flight. The forward thrust vents would close during forward flight while the rear was vectored horizontally. Armament for the fighter seems to be short-range heat-seeking missiles. This would have probably been the best low-weight option available. This design too was never pursued past the pen and paper stage. Design work on the Canuck was abandoned when the company oriented itself towards the production of the Arrow. The last production variant was Mark V, and they would serve the RCAF until their complete retirement in 1981.
They forgot the swept wing version of it too that was proposed. So now we're going to be looking at the flight of the last Canuck. This isn't not a very long one, it's about 4 minutes, but it was the swan song of a very famous, and it was unique Canadian aircraft that really does deserve its place in history. At least one of our designs made it past the paper stage and the prototype stage. But anyways, we'll get on to that when we go to the Arrow. So let's watch that video, and then we'll go on to models.
The CF-100, known as the Canuck, was designed and built by Avro Canada in 1949. Its top speed was 640 miles per hour. Its range, 2,000 miles. They built 692 of them between 1951 and 59, and the 660th, they numbered 760. It was said she was a study in aviation contradictions. The best jet engines in the world mounted on an airframe that was too old-fashioned to utilize full thrust. The best ejection system in the world, and the worst designed seats in cockpit. Yet, she was our own, the only Canadian-designed fighter ever to go into mass production. And that's what they gathered here to celebrate. The federal government, represented by Minister of Defense Gilles Lamontagne.
For 38 years, there has been no major war. We must have done something right.
Yes, maybe we had done something right. We built a fighter that never fought. Her last flight took place on June 28, 1982, when pilot George Greff and flight engineer Dan Kettleson took her up above Montreal. You are watching the last flight of the last CF-100 in the world. CF-100 number 760 has a remarkable history. After a 9-year military career, it became a flying test bed for Pratt & Whitney Canada's new small business jet engine, the JT-15D. With the engine slung under the fuselage, number 760 flew out of Saint-Hubert on its many test missions. In all, it logged 2,049 hours, and half of these in the service of civil aviation. By doing so, it made a major contribution in the development of Canadian gas turbine engine technology. Test pilot George Greff.
During a typical test, the engineer in the back would operate all the controls, including the throttle, and all I had up in the front cockpit was the fuel shutoff and the fire extinguisher, which really isn't there very much. But he was well equipped with the various instrumentation and was able to operate the engine from shutdown to start up to maximum performance and of course get all the readings simultaneously. We used to call it the lead sled, or the clunk, but it didn't mean it was a clunk. In fact, it was a very well designed and built airplane. I think the people that flew it have nothing but good to say about it. I really didn't realize it was the last flight. I thought we had one more flight to do. However, when I did find out it was the last flight, I was quite happy to do it. It was the last CF-100 in the world.
Well, that was all interesting, especially the last flight. It kind of a tearjerker on that one for me, being a Canadian, seeing what's happened to her. I'm pretty sure there is a guy. If I find his website, let me see if I can find his website. Okay, I found the video. We'll watch that one. It's actually a news video and talking to the guy about about restoring the aircraft. There's also one in Ottawa, and there's also one at the Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, which I got tons of pictures of because I just don't live that far from it. A lot of the pictures of my son in the cockpit, which is fine. That's a dad-son thing. Anyways.
CF-100 is a two-seater, long-range, all-weather fighter. It was designed and built in Canada and is in service with the RCAF
jet fighter planes, lives at the Hangar Flight Museum here in Calgary. It is in the process of being restored. Brian Desjardins from the museum is here this morning on an update. So this has been a pretty exciting project for you guys. The cost of overhauling this thing is pretty big, more than $300,000. And that's to make it authentic and to restore it to its original look.
Its original look. It's authentic look. It's refurbished from the inside out. It's a hefty, lofty project, $325,000. If you were, that's for full static display. So if we were wanting to have it taxiable or being able to fire up on the tarmac or even flyable, you would want to times that price by 3 or 4.
And you can't just put lipstick on it because it has been deteriorating because it sat for a number of years. And if you just do sort of the outside, it's still going to continue to deteriorate, and you're fighting a losing battle. So you have to take each piece apart.
Yes, yes. We have, currently right now, we also have a plane that's being restored in Wetaskiwin at Historic Aviation, and the idea is that we would have that plane in there and being restored from the inside out because it's been deteriorating with inside the plane. So if we're only doing a lipstick cosmetic version of it, the problem's not going to be fixed. The lifespan of it's still going to be short.
Right.
So the idea is that we want to do a full static display, full authentic display, because during the summer we also have open, we call it the open plane days, where we have visitors and tourists and public able to come and they can get into the plane and take photos.
And have a look at it from the inside. So
we want to restore it in a way that it's makes the aviation community happy, because it's a very tight-knit community. We've received donations all across Canada, the USA, even some UK.
Oh.
And they're all pretty particular about how that plane should
It's got to be
restored.
done properly.
It's got to be done properly.
And there's several different levels paying for it, but you guys have to come up with some money on your own.
Yes, we do. The Hangar Flight Museum is a civic attraction. We're a civic partner with the City of Calgary, strong partners. We run the museum. We have artifacts that are assets of the city, one including the CF-100. So they understand the situation as well. So we've been working together on, can the Hangar Flight Museum raise 25% of the 325, which is about 82,000, and that the city then would come up with 75%, or about 242,000. In 6 weeks, we started a fundraising campaign, and we raised 75% of that 82. So that's $62,000 within 6 to 8 weeks.
That's how important, that tells you how important this is.
Yes.
To restore.
This speaks volumes to me that the aviation community, from private donations to a few foundations, no grants, we've raised that much in such a short period of time. So we're continuing the fundraising into 2019, and we're hoping to reach that goal in the next short while. And we're putting in a business case to the City of Calgary to continue their offer of the 75% and get this project done. And yes, it will find a home indoors in one of the hangars.
Yeah, you're not going to do all this work and then put it outside to start deteriorating again. Well, it's an exciting project. Important projects. It's an important piece of history, and it needs to be done right. So the fundraising continues for the folks at the Hangar Museum. To make a donation or more info, go to the website, thehangarmuseum.ca. Thanks for coming in today. We look forward to seeing this this plane when it's all shined up and ready to go.
We'll be inviting Global News.
We'll be there.
And the public. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. And please remember to subscribe to my channel and punch that like button. You also can donate to my channel through my PayPal, which is on the main page of my channel. And you also can donate through Patreon. So, as always, every build is an adventure, so go make it awesome. And we'll see you again later. And you have a good day. Goodbye.